with pure, conditional, and obligations with period. So what's the basis? Basis from the viewpoint of the presence or absence of a condition. Siyempre, conditional, pure condition obligations without period. The basis is the presence or absence of a condition or term or period. So they are classified into pure obligation, in which it is not subject. If we say pure obligation, it is not subject to any condition or term or period. It's not subject. Pure. When it comes to conditional obligation, it is subject to a condition. While obligation with a term or period, those whose effects are subjected into one way or another to the expiration of said term, in which the expiration or one way or another is subject to the said term. When it comes to pure obligation is that which no condition is placed, nor a day fixed for its compliance. No condition is placed, nor a day fixed for its compliance. That is for pure obligation. No day or no day fixed for its compliance. The effect is that other obligations, effect is that if the obligation is pure, it is immediately demandable. So when it comes to pure obligation, there is no fixed period or fixed day to be complied with for its compliance. So therefore, the legal effect is that it is immediately demandable. Other obligations which are also demandable at once. Obligations with a resolutory condition. So these are some example of these are some examples of obligations with demandable at once. Other obligations which are demandable at once, aside from pure obligation, is the obligations with a resolutory obligation condition and obligations with a resolutory term or period. So again, pure condition is not subject to a fix, is not subject to condition or a day fix for its compliance. So therefore, the effect is that it is legally or immediately demandable. And together with pure conditions, which is demandable at once, those are obligations with resolutory condition and obligations with resolutory term or period. When it comes to conditional obligations, which in which if we say condition, it is an uncertain event. Condition, an uncertain event. It is an uncertain event which wields an influence on a legal relations. It is an uncertain event. It means to say not certain, not fixed, diba? Or there is no, it's not specific. Uncertain event wields an influence on legal relation. It is also defined as every future and uncertain event. If we say condition, it is an uncertain future event, future and uncertain event upon which an obligation or provision is made to depend. The essential thing about condition is uncertainty. Yes. If we say condition, uncertainty, that is why uncertain event or an future event about condition is uncertainty. Thus, although the death of a person may be in the future, and there is uncertainty as to the date of its arrival. Yes. Example of condition is death, diba? Death is maybe future, diba? Death is future but uncertain to happen. Uncertain as to the date of its arrival. Maybe in future, death of a person may be in the future, and there is uncertainty as to the date of its arrival. The certainty of its happening makes it a term and not a condition. It is a term. The certainty of its happening, yes, it is a certain. un- uncertain, if we say um, death of a person, it is future. It is future to happen. Uncertain date of its arrival, uncertain but certain that it will happen, um, certain to happen. So it is a term. If certain, di ba? If death is certain, if we say we know already death, di ba? As a general rule, death of a person is a future and uncertain as to the date of its arrival. But if we know already the death, there is already time limit for a person due to illness, due to health problems. So therefore, death is certain and not condition. The opposite. Death is certain of its happening makes it a term and not a condition. That's the opposite between the two. Kinds of obligation. Suspensive and resolutory. Diba? If we say obligation, there can be three. Pure obligation, um, conditional obligation, and obligation with a term or period. If we say pure condition, it is not subject to a place. If we say pure condition, it is not subject to a condition, and it has no fixed date for its compliance, and so therefore is legally demandable at once. The same also with obligations with resolutory condition and obligation with resolutory term or period. But for condition, it is subject to condition obligation. It is subject to a condition in which a condition is an uncertain future and uncertain event, like death. As a general rule, it is future to happen, but uncertain as to the date of its arrival. But death becomes also certain if due to health problem, so it becomes a term, not a condition. What are the kinds of condition under conditional obligation? There can be two: suspensive and resolutory kinds of obligation. Suspensive and resolutory. If we say suspensive, the happening of which gives rise to an obligation, while resolutory, the happening of which extinguishes of an obligation. Suspensive condition and resolutory condition are opposite. In suspensive condition, the fulfillment of an obligation gives rise to the fulfillment of a condition gives rise to an obligation. While in resolutory, the fulfillment of a condition extinguishes the obligation. And also, there can be three when it comes to condition: potestative, casual, and mixed. Potestative, casual, and mixed. When it comes to potestative, potestative, it only the fulfillment of the condition depends upon the will of the debtor or of one of the parties to the juridical relation. Take note, if the fulfillment of an obligation depends upon the debtor, it's not valid. If if the condition depends upon the will of the creditor, it's valid. Potestative, it's the fulfillment of an obligation depending upon the will of one of the parties to the juridical relation. What is casual? If we say casual, the fulfillment depends exclusively upon the chance or other factors. Casual. The opposite, if we say potestative, it depends upon the will of one of the parties at a juridical relations. But when it comes to casual, it is the fulfillment exclusively upon a chance or other factors, including the will of a third persons and not a will of the parties to the juridical relations. So if it is casual, exclusively, fulfillment depends exclusively upon a chance or other factors. Depends a chance. Chance, if we say casual, it depends, the fulfillment of a condition depends upon a chance or other factors, um, like depending upon the will of a third person and not upon the will of the parties, and not upon the will of the parties to the juridical relation. When it comes to mix in which the fulfillment depends upon partly upon the will of the one of the parties to the juridical relation and partly upon chance by factors, by other factors such as the will of the third person, depends partly upon the will of one of the parties and partly upon the chance of the other factors. If we say condition, positive and negative, how is that? If we say positive, a condition refers to an act. Condition refers to an act while negative refers to an omission. Positive condition refers to an act, while negative condition, it refers to an omission wherein you are off to do it but you fail to do it negligently, di ba? Divisible and indivisible. This is another kind of obligation. Divisible and indivisible. If we say divisible, if by nature, if by its nature, divisible if by its nature, by an agreement or under the law, it can be performed in parts. If it is divisible, it can be divisible by a law, by its nature, by an agreement. And it can be performed in parts. No? First part, second part, third part. Because of its um, by nature, by law, and by the agreement. But when it comes to indivisible, it is by nature, by an agreement, or under the law, cannot be performed in parts. Indivisible. That's the opposite. Next, conjunctive and disjunctive. Conjunctive requires the fulfillment of all the conditions. That's conjunctive. Requires the fulfillment. Conjunctive requires the fulfillment of all conditions, while disjunctive requires the fulfillment of one condition. But conjunctive requires the fulfillment of all the conditions. Fulfillment of all conditions, while disjunctive fulfills only of one condition. Express or implied. Express or implied. Express, the condition is stated, while implied, the condition is merely inferred. Condition is stated, condition is stated expressly. If it is impliedly, the condition is merely inferred. Possible and impossible. Possible to do, while impossible, fulfillment is impossible either physically or legally. So those are kinds of obligations and conditions. We will just continue.